In this podcast episode, Jeremy Boring discusses a wide range of topics central to the contemporary conservative movement, new media, and the culture wars within the right wing. Topics include the internal conflicts on the right, hiring decisions, and controversies surrounding figures like Candace Owens, the political projects of personalities such as Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, the spiritual and religious influences at play, the challenges posed by social media and technology, and his own creative work on the Pendragon cycle. Jeremy Boring paints a vivid picture of the ongoing civil war within the American right, an infighting exacerbated by the unique circumstances of a one-term former president, Donald Trump, whose inability to run in a consecutive term stymies traditional political power consolidation. This void sparks competition for influence, money, and vision among right-wing factions and media figures. Boring emphasizes the rapid proliferation of right-of-center voices across new media platforms, many jockeying for dominance, often incentivized both by financial gain and power, which leads to a fractious and sometimes destructive environment. He recalls the early days of the Daily Wire as pioneers in exploiting new media, especially social media and video podcasting, to create a conservative alternative to mainstream liberal-dominated media. However, he laments conservatives' typical reluctance to adopt emerging technologies swiftly, which has cost them cultural ground, citing social media and AI as current examples of missed or underutilized opportunities. Boring candidly identifies hiring Candace Owens as possibly the biggest mistake of his professional career. Despite initially believing in her talent and positive potential, such as her effective stance during the Black Lives Matter protests, he describes her as a force that can either powerfully illuminate issues or cause substantial damage if misdirected. He argues that Owens ultimately embraces audience capture as a virtue, expressing what her audience wants to hear rather than abiding by consistent convictions. Her recent willingness to unleash damaging rhetoric, including plans for exposés on the widow of Charlie Kirk, exemplifies a shift towards cynicism and harm. Comparing her rhetorical tactics to the destructive impulse seen in violent left-wing groups like Antifa, Boring suggests that Owens and similar media personalities engage in a rhetorical tearing down of foundational Western narratives and symbols, paralleling physical attacks on statues and monuments. Boring differentiates the political projects of figures like Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes from what he labels the grift industrial complex. He sees Carlson and Fuentes as key players in an emergent coalition combining left-wing economic populism, emphasizing redistribution, protectionism, and economic defense of the ordinary man, with right-wing social conservatism, particularly around identity and traditional values. This movement aims to forge a new American majority, one that departs from the post-war order toward a post-liberal, more authoritarian vision with reduced human freedoms. While expressing disagreement with this vision, Boring acknowledges its coherence and political seriousness, in contrast to the purely self-serving or entertainment-driven motivations of others on the right. He further discusses J.D. Vance's ambiguous role within this evolving landscape, highlighting loyalty and political pragmatism as possible reasons for his closeness to Carlson, while acknowledging that Vance's political allegiance remains uncertain. A substantial part of the conversation explores the link between charisma and mental instability, particularly in public figures and entertainers. Boring uses an analogy from aerodynamics to describe charisma as analogous to dynamic instability. It allows a public figure to be unpredictable and compelling, which can be both an asset and a risk. He contrasts charismatic entertainers against steady, logically consistent political voices, emphasizing the difficulties in navigating truth, influence, and audience expectations in this space. This dynamic also relates to the broader issue of audience susceptibility, where the allure of charisma often obscures accuracy or consistency. Boring notes that this is not limited to the right wing, but interacts distinctively due to conservatives' historical exclusion from major popular culture and a pervasive bunker mentality that fosters paranoia and conspiracy thinking. The discussion delves into the religious and spiritual dimensions, motivating and shaping parts of the new right. Boring highlights the use and misuse of Christian language by figures like Nick Fuentes, who co-opt Christ as King as a tribal and exclusionary rallying cry, particularly targeting Jewish communities. Boring condemns this as an improper manipulation of religion for political gain and a misrepresentation of gospel teachings. He also outlines a growing appeal of traditionalist Catholicism among conservative young white men as a reaction to the perceived failures of evangelical Protestantism and liberalism more broadly. This movement seeks structure, ritual, and tribal affiliation, but risks entangling with anti-Semitic histories and modern conspiracies. Boring stresses this religious involvement is more instrumental and tribal than genuinely theological or consistent with Christian doctrine. Identifying social media as the defining technological and cultural challenge of the present era, Boring underscores its profound negative impacts, particularly on children and civic life. He warns that society has largely overlooked the damage caused by smartphones and the ubiquitous presence of social media in daily life, with political and cultural dysfunction directly fueled by these platforms. The rise of digital pornography is cited as a parallel example where personal responsibility meets systemic lack of regulation, noting that many children have extensive access to content far beyond what prior generations could have imagined. Boring advocates for renewed cultural and possibly regulatory guardrails around technology usage, especially for minors, to mitigate harms. He stresses the urgency of grappling with social media's effects before turning full attention to newer concerns like artificial intelligence, arguing the cultural ecosystem around social media remains dangerously ill understood and poorly managed. Boring articulates a vision for conservatism that embraces both preserving valuable aspects of the past and boldly building a better future. He rejects the notion of mere preservation for its own sake and urges conservatives to be active creators, engaging in cultural production and innovation rather than futile resistance to change. He relates this philosophy to his work on the Pendragon cycle, a substantial creative project retelling Arthurian myth with Christian themes. Boring views such artistic endeavors as integral to shaping intellectual and cultural life, offering a hopeful rejection of nihilism and nihilistic tendencies prevalent in other media like Game of Thrones. Finally, Boring reflects on America's political trajectory, acknowledging real grievances articulated by both populist right-wing and left-wing critiques, but emphasizing the enduring problem of human nature, original sin, as the root cause of societal dysfunction rather than any single political ideology. He defends liberalism as fundamentally compatible with freedom and the gospel, while arguing that the erosion of cultural institutions and family structures has unchanneled liberalism, allowing it to falter. He warns against embracing illiberal or authoritarian alternatives, even those framed as virtues, pointing out their historical and spiritual futility. Instead, the challenge is to rebuild virtue, strengthen intermediary institutions like family and culture, and channel liberty toward flourishing rather than destruction.